When Judge Franklin Pierce summoned Emma Lawson to his courtroom that day, he believed he had found the perfect target, a quiet literature teacher who had dared to challenge him in public. His plan was simple: humiliate her, ruin her career, and restore his bruised ego. But as Emma stood calmly in her burgundy sweater, clutching her notes, the judge had no idea he had just set the stage for his own undoing. Earlier that morning, Emma Lawson brushed a strand of blonde hair behind her ear and wrote symbolism in modern literature across the whiteboard. Her classroom of seniors looked on, some intrigued, others counting down to lunch. This was Emma's 10th year at Westridge High, and despite the challenges of teenage restlessness, she cherished every moment of teaching. Miss Lawson called Jeremy from the back. "Why do we need to analyze symbolism? Can't we just enjoy the story?" Emma set down her marker and smiled. "That's actually a profound question, Jeremy. Literature isn't only entertainment. It reflects justice, truth, and human experience. The deeper you look, the more you understand, not just the story, but the world around you." The bell rang. Students gathered their belongings, but Emma's eyes caught the school newspaper left behind on a desk. The headline read, "Local Judge's Controversial Decision Affects School Funding." Her brow furrowed as she remembered the heated community meeting last month, where she had spoken against Judge Franklin Pierce's ruling, a ruling that diverted education funds into a private development project. Later that day, in the teacher's lounge, her colleague Diane gave her a knowing nudge. "Heard you turned into quite the activist at that town hall." Emma shook her head. "I just spoke the truth. What Judge Pierce did might have been legal, but it wasn't right. Those funds belong to education." "Well, you certainly ruffled feathers," Diane warned. "Pierce has friends everywhere." "I'm just a literature teacher expressing an opinion," Emma replied. "What's he going to do? Sue me for that?" What few at Westridge High knew was that Emma Lawson wasn't just a literature teacher. Years earlier, she had graduated at the top of her law school class. She never took the bar exam, though, realizing during internships that the courtroom wasn't where she belonged. Instead, she poured her passion for justice into teaching, using stories to shape young minds. Driving home that evening, her thoughts drifted to her grandfather, a small-town attorney who had defended the powerless. He had always told her, "The law is about protecting the vulnerable, not wielding power." His old law books now lined her living room shelves, a quiet reminder of the path she had left behind. Back in her modest apartment, Emma kicked off her shoes, ready to grade papers. The answering machine blinked. "Miss Lawson, this is the municipal court clerk. You are being summoned regarding your recent traffic violation. Judge Pierce will be presiding. Please appear this Friday at 9 a.m. Emma frowned. A traffic violation? She had received a minor ticket weeks ago, a rolling stop, but she had already paid the fine online. Why would she need to appear in court? Unease stirred in her chest as she remembered Judge Pierce's piercing stare at the town hall meeting. "Strange," she muttered, opening her laptop to confirm the payment. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of Judge Pierce's carefully laid trap. Meanwhile, inside Judge Franklin Pierce's chambers, authority hung heavy in the air. Mahogany shelves stacked with leather, bound law volumes, golden-framed certificates, and a massive desk designed to intimidate visitors. Pierce adjusted his tie as he studied Emma Lawson's file, a thin smile tugging at his lips. "Gerald," he called to his clerk, "bring me everything you have on this teacher." "Emma Lawson." The clerk nodded nervously. He had worked for Pierce long enough to recognize when the judge was hunting someone. "The summons for her traffic violation has been issued, sir," Gerald confirmed. "Good," Pierce murmured, leaning back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. "She thinks she can stand in a public forum, question my judgment, undermine my reputation. I've sentenced hardened criminals who've shown more respect. Who does this high school teacher think she is?" The clerk shifted uneasily. "Sir, it was just a town hall meeting, freedom of speech and all that." Pierce's eyes hardened. "It wasn't what she said, Gerald. It was how she said it. Quoting precedents, questioning statutory interpretations. She made me look incompetent in front of the entire council." His hand slammed the file shut. What truly unsettled Judge Pierce wasn't just Emma's criticism. It was her precision. Most citizens rambled with emotion at public hearings, easy to dismiss. But Emma had been different. Measured. She cited relevant case law. She highlighted procedural inconsistencies. It was almost as if, "Find out everything about her," Pierce ordered. Her education, her past jobs, her connections. Everything. Later that afternoon, Gerald returned with a thin folder. "Not much, sir. She's been teaching literature at Westridge for 10 years. Lives alone. Pays her taxes, clean record. But," he hesitated, She graduated law school 15 years ago, top of her class, but never took the bar. Pierce's eyebrows rose. A slow smile crept across his face. A law school graduate, he mused. Interesting. She knows just enough to be dangerous, Judge Pierce muttered, pacing before his window, but not enough to defend herself properly in court. His sharp eyes narrowed as he watched storm clouds gather beyond the glass. Then, turning abruptly, he gave his clerk a new command. Gerald, modify the summons. Change it from a paid traffic violation to failure to appear for a scheduled court hearing. Add a contempt of court charge. Gerald froze. But, sir, that would be fabrication. The system gives judges discretion for a reason. Pierce snapped. Consider this a lesson in respect. Our little schoolteacher will face either a heavy fine or community service. Nothing too severe, just enough to scar her record and remind her to stay in her lane. The clerk hesitated, but Judge Pierce's reputation was ironclad. His influence stretched deep into the legal system and across the town. Few dared question him, even when his methods bent ethical lines. Most defendants caved, paying fines rather than fighting a man who held all the cards. That evening, Pierce dined with local power brokers, including the superintendent of schools. Over wine and whispered conversations, he casually voiced his concerns. Politically active teachers undermine our institutions, he said smoothly, swirling his glass. This Emma Lawson situation troubles me. Such behavior sets a poor example for students, don't you think? The superintendent shifted uneasily but nodded. Everyone in the room knew Judge Pierce controlled funding channels that schools depended on. I'll look into it immediately, he promised. Pierce smiled as though benevolent. I'm sure it's nothing serious, but teachers should stick to teaching, not criticizing the judiciary. Wouldn't you agree? The trap was sprung. By the time Emma Lawson set foot in his courtroom, she would be facing not just false legal charges, but the looming shadow of professional ruin. At Westridge High, the faculty meeting had just ended when Principal Stevens asked Emma to remain behind. His expression was heavy, his tone clipped. Emma, I received a troubling call from the superintendent, he said, removing his glasses. Apparently, you're involved in legal trouble. Emma blinked. Legal trouble? You mean my traffic ticket? I paid that weeks ago. That's not what I've been told. Stevens slid a sheet of paper across his desk. According to the superintendent, there's a summons for failure to appear, and even a contempt of court charge. Judge Pierce personally expressed concerns about, in his words, educators who disrespect the legal system. Emma stared at the paper, her confusion turning to dread. That's impossible. I have the payment receipt right here. This doesn't make sense. I hope so, Stevens said cautiously, because the superintendent hinted this could escalate, even affect your contract if it isn't resolved. A cold realization washed over Emma. This is about the town hall meeting, isn't it? The principal's silence was all the confirmation she needed. Later that day, Emma discovered an official notice in her mailbox. Unlike the automated ticket she had received earlier, this one carried serious weight charges of failure to appear and contempt of court. Her appearance before Judge Pierce was scheduled in just 3 days. With trembling hands, she called the clerk's office. I'm sorry. Miss Lawson, the voice on the line said impatiently. Our records show you were scheduled to appear last Friday regarding your traffic violation. When you failed to appear, Judge Pierce issued the contempt citation. But I was never notified of any court date, Emma protested. I paid the fine online. I have the confirmation number. The system shows the payment was processed, but flagged for irregular handling, the clerk explained flatly. You'll need to address this with the judge directly. That evening, Emma pulled an old, dusty box from her closet. Her grandfather's case files and legal notes. She set them on the floor beside her laptop and began digging. She traced through years of Judge Pierce's rulings, reading articles and archived decisions. A troubling pattern emerged case after case where his judgments leaned suspiciously toward the same developers and business interests. And yet, in 6 years on the bench, not a single complaint against him had ever gone beyond an initial filing. Emma's phone rang. It was Diane. Emma, something's wrong. Stevens has been asking teachers if you've been talking politics in class. What's happening? Emma's jaw tightened. Judge Pierce doesn't like being criticized. As she hung up, her fear began to fade. The trembling stopped. In its place came the razor-sharp clarity she hadn't felt since law school. Judge Pierce thought he was cornering a helpless teacher, but he had overlooked one thing. Emma Lawson was not easily broken. Two can play this game, she whispered, pulling open her grandfather's leather-bound copy of Judicial Ethics and Misconduct. She sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by piles of legal texts, case histories, and printouts. Her blonde hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, her pen circling names and patterns across Pierce's record. The judge thought he had silenced her. But Emma Lawson was preparing to fight back. "It's not just me," Emma murmured, piecing the puzzle together. Judge Pierce had a history of turning minor infractions into weapons against those who crossed him. 3 years ago, a journalist who published a critical article suddenly found himself tangled in audit troubles. Last year, an attorney who challenged one of Pierce's rulings was bombarded with bar complaints that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The pattern was subtle but undeniable. Most people simply paid their fines or backed down rather than risk the fallout. Pierce was clever, never pushing so far in a single case that it drew scrutiny, but always pushing just enough to intimidate. Her phone buzzed with a message from Diane Stevens, asked to observe your class tomorrow. Says it's about curriculum review. Emma sighed. The pressure tactics were ramping up. She paced her small apartment, running through legal strategies in her mind, each option forming, collapsing, then forming again. Fighting openly might preserve her integrity, but it could also cost her job. Yielding, however, meant allowing Pierce's abuse of power to go unchallenged. Her eyes fell on the framed photo of her grandfather on the bookshelf. "What would you do?" she whispered to his smiling face. She pulled down his old leather-bound journal, worn thin with age, and a yellowed newspaper clipping fluttered to the floor. It showed him standing proudly with community members who had once defeated a corrupt official. His words echoed in her memory, "You don't fight power with power. You fight it with preparation and truth." That night, Emma made 3 crucial phone calls. First, to an old law school classmate who now worked at the State Bar Association. Second, to a former student-turned-investigative journalist. And third, to the court clerk, leaving notice that she would represent herself at the upcoming hearing. The next morning, she stood before her class with unwavering calm. Even as Principal Stevens sat in the back scribbling notes, she spoke passionately about To Kill a Mockingbird, emphasizing the courage of speaking truth to power. When class ended, Stevens approached her desk. "Emma, about this court situation," he said carefully. "Maybe you should just apologize to Judge Pierce. These things have a way of spiraling." Emma smiled politely. "I appreciate your concern, but I believe in setting an example for my students. Sometimes doing what's right means standing in uncomfortable places." As soon as he left, she slipped a small digital recorder into her purse and reviewed her notes again. Judge Pierce believed he was ensnaring a naive teacher. What he didn't realize was that she knew the law far better than he expected, and she had nothing to lose. The next 2 days blurred together in preparation. She took a personal day from school, claiming she needed to consult an attorney. Technically true, though in this case, she was both attorney and client. At the county law library, she pored over judicial conduct precedents and contempt rulings. Mrs. Finch, the elderly librarian, watched her with curiosity. "Haven't seen anyone dig this deep in years," she remarked, guiding Emma toward a thick volume on contempt proceedings. "Most folks just Google. My grandfather used to say real research happens in books, not on search engines." Emma replied with a faint smile. Mrs. Finch studied her closely. "You're not a practicing attorney, are you?" "I know most of the local bar."
"No," Emma answered.
"Just a teacher with a legal background, in a situation that demands attention to detail." Later, at the courthouse records office, she requested transcripts from Pierce's past contempt cases. The clerk raised a brow at her precision. "Strange request for someone representing themselves," he said, handing over the thick stack. "I believe in being thorough," Emma replied evenly. That night, she mapped everything into a detailed timeline: her original traffic citation, her online payment confirmation, the supposed notices she'd never received, and the town hall meeting where she had publicly criticized Pierce. The link was only circumstantial, but it was there. Her phone rang. It was Mark Chen, her former student, now an investigative reporter. "Ems Lawson, I found something. Judge Pierce's contempt charges have spiked 400% since he took office, mostly against people who've opposed him publicly. It's not big enough to trigger oversight, but it's definitely not normal." "Can you get me names of others he's targeted?" Emma asked. "Already compiling a list," Mark said. "Sending it to you now. But be careful. Pierce has serious ties to the county executive and half the school board." After hanging up, Emma refined her strategy. Directly accusing Pierce of misconduct wouldn't stick without solid proof. Instead, she'd focus on the procedural flaws in her own case, laying groundwork for a larger pattern if the opportunity arose. That evening, she carefully chose her courtroom attire: a burgundy sweater and black slacks. Professional but understated. No power suit to signal her training. Surprise would be her sharpest weapon. She practiced her arguments in front of the mirror, perfecting the balance. Respectful but firm, knowledgeable without sounding like a lawyer. Pierce expected a nervous teacher who'd fumble her words. What he'd meet instead was someone prepared, deliberate, and quietly dangerous. Before bed, she packed her grandfather's worn leather briefcase with her neatly organized evidence payment confirmations, legal citations, transcripts, procedural rules, every piece in place, every step ready. Between two legal pads, Emma slid a sealed envelope, information she hoped she'd never need, but had prepared just in case. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. The best weapon in a courtroom is being more prepared than anyone expects. As she finally went to bed, she felt a strange calm settle over her. Tomorrow wouldn't just be about defending herself against fabricated charges. It would be about standing up against abuse of power. Exactly what she taught her students every time they read literature about courage and integrity. Win or lose, she would face Judge Pierce on her own terms, not his. The municipal courthouse buzzed with morning chaos. Attorneys shuffled papers, clerks called out names, nervous defendants waited their turn. Emma sat quietly in the back, watching how Pierce handled the cases before hers. His pattern was unmistakable. Brusque with defendants, deferential to prosecutors, dismissive of explanations. He ruled quickly, rarely citing any statute. Most troubling was how often he cut off self-represented individuals before they could even finish a sentence. She noticed Gerald, the clerk she'd spoken to earlier, avoiding eye contact whenever harsh rulings were delivered. His discomfort was obvious. Docket number 47B, Lawson Emma, failure to appear and contempt of court. Gerald finally called. Emma rose, steady and deliberate, placing her grandfather's worn briefcase on the defense table. Judge Pierce barely glanced up, his face set in practiced disinterest. "Miss Lawson," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "You're charged with failing to appear for a scheduled hearing regarding traffic violation TR 2023-45A92 and with contempt for disregarding a judicial summons. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Emma replied, her tone calm and steady. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding I'd like to clarify." Pierce raised a skeptical eyebrow. "The facts are quite clear. You were notified to appear on October 15th. When you failed to appear, this court issued a contempt citation. That brings us here. With respect, Your Honor, I never received any notice to appear on October 15th, Emma said. I received a citation on October 1st, which I paid online on October 3rd. I have the confirmation receipt here." She slid the document across to the clerk, who handed it to the judge. Pierce glanced at it, dismissive. "Payment doesn't excuse a mandatory appearance, Miss Lawson." The citation clearly indicated a court date. "With respect, Your Honor, it did not," Emma said firmly, holding up the original citation. "There's no date anywhere on this form." And the online system confirmed the matter was resolved upon payment. A flicker of irritation crossed Pierce's face. "Miss Lawson, perhaps in your English classes, you're used to having the last word. In this courtroom, I decide what constitutes proper notice." The tone was dripping with condescension, and several attorneys in the gallery exchanged knowing glances. "I understand, Your Honor," Emma said, unflinching, "but procedural due process requires actual notice before contempt can be imposed. Could the court provide proof of the notification I allegedly received?" Pierce's jaw tightened. The simple schoolteacher was supposed to be intimidated, apologetic, easy to dismiss. Instead, she was composed, methodical, and clearly prepared. "Proceed carefully, Miss Lawson," he warned. "Challenging this court's procedures only deepens your contempt." The courtroom grew silent. Lawyers and defendants alike leaned in to watch. "Miss Lawson," Pierce said sharply, "this court's records show proper notification was sent. Whether you received it is not a defense." Emma stayed calm. "Understood, Your Honor. May I see the proof of service for that notification?" The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Gerald, provide Miss Lawson the standard notification record." The clerk shuffled uneasily before pulling a form from the file. Emma examined it closely. "Your Honor, this document is dated October 10th, but it's not signed by a process server, nor is there a certified mail receipt. There's no evidence this was ever delivered." A muscle twitched in Pierce's jaw. "Are you suggesting court officials fabricated records?" "Not at all, Your Honor," Emma replied evenly. "I'm simply pointing out that Municipal Court Rule 7.3 requires documented proof of delivery in contempt proceedings. This record does not meet that requirement." The judge's face darkened. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Lawson," Pierce snapped, "your amateur legal arguments are testing my patience. You clearly have a problem with authority, as we saw at the town hall meeting last month. Perhaps that is the real issue here. There it was. The connection Emma had been waiting for him to make out loud. From the corner of her eye, she saw a young reporter furiously scribbling notes. I wasn't aware, Emma said calmly, that my constitutionally protected speech at a public forum was relevant to a traffic citation. Pierce flushed. Your attitude is the problem. This court finds you in contempt for failing to appear. You're fined 2,000 and sentenced to 40 hours of community service. He slammed his gavel, certain he'd ended the matter. Emma didn't flinch. Your Honor, she said clearly, her voice cutting through the silence. I'd like to make a motion. This matter is concluded, Miss Lawson, Judge Pierce snapped. Emma didn't flinch. A motion for judicial recusal is always timely, Your Honor, she replied evenly. Under Judicial Conduct Rule 2.11, a judge shall recuse himself when his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. The courtroom fell silent. Pierce stared at Emma, momentarily speechless. When he finally found his voice, it was edged with irritation. On what possible grounds? Emma opened her briefcase calmly. I'd be happy to explain, Your Honor. She stood tall, her hands resting lightly on her grandfather's briefcase. Every eye in the room fixed on the unassuming teacher who had just challenged one of the most powerful men in the county. Your Honor, Emma began, her voice steady. I move for your recusal on 3 grounds. She withdrew a neatly organized folder. First, there's a clear appearance of bias. You explicitly connected these proceedings to my protected speech at a town hall meeting, suggesting this case is retaliatory. Pierce's face darkened. Ms. Lawson, you're treading on dangerous ground. Second, Emma continued, undeterred. There are significant procedural irregularities. She held up a printout from the court system. The original citation was marked paid, resolved on October 3rd.
Yet,
On October 9th, after I criticized your rulings at the town hall, the status was manually changed to appearance required, with no notification to me. Records show this is the only citation in the past year altered in such a way. A murmurs rippled through the gallery. The court reporter's hands flew across her steno machine. Furthermore, Emma added, producing more documents. I've identified 7 other cases where individuals who publicly disagreed with your rulings later faced unusual contempt charges or procedural penalties. Pierce slammed his gavel. That's enough. This is contemptuous behavior, which brings me to my 3rd point. Emma pressed on, her voice respectful but resolute. Judicial Canon 2.2 requires a judge to remain free from influence of personal, social, or political interests. If Your Honor won't recuse himself, I'm prepared to file a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Committee. She placed a sealed envelope on the table. Inside is documentation of your repeated misuse of contempt powers against critics, records of irregularities in multiple cases, and testimony from 3 defendants who experienced similar treatment. The courtroom buzzed with astonished whispers. Several attorneys scribbled furiously. A young reporter stopped writing altogether, his mouth slightly open. Pierce's face drained of color. Miss Lawson, he said, his voice strained. Where exactly did you acquire your legal knowledge? Emma allowed herself a small smile. Before I found my calling as a literature teacher, I graduated summa cum laude from state law school. I chose not to practice, but I've maintained my legal education. My grandfather always told me, knowledge of the law is every citizen's best protection against its abuse. She laid her hands flat on the table. I've submitted evidence of irregularities, documented bias, and formally moved for recusal. If denied, I'm prepared to appeal immediately under the collateral order doctrine, as established in Hampton v. County Court. For once, Judge Pierce said nothing. The realization dawned on him that his intimidation had backfired. Emma had set a trap of her own, and he had stepped straight into it. Finally, he called a 15-minute recess. Behind closed doors, his tone had changed completely. What exactly do you want? Miss Lawson, he asked, his arrogance replaced with controlled anger. Justice, Emma answered steadily. Dismissal of these fabricated charges. Notation that they were dismissed with prejudice, and your recusal from any matters involving me or Westridge High. I've also compiled a list of 7 other cases that deserve review. When court resumed, Pierce's voice was clipped. All charges against Miss Lawson are dismissed with prejudice. To avoid any appearance of impropriety, I will recuse myself from future matters involving her. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Outside, a reporter rushed to Emma. Miss Lawson, would you care to comment? She smiled softly. Our justice system works best when everyone understands their rights, even judges. 2 weeks later, Emma was back in her classroom, guiding her students through To Kill a Mockingbird. Mid-discussion, Principal Stevens and Superintendent Davis entered. After class, Stevens approached her with humility. "I owe you an apology. I should have supported you. You were in a difficult position," Emma replied graciously. "Things have changed," the superintendent added. "Judge Pierce has taken a leave of absence, and our school funding has been restored." That evening, Emma found her grandfather's restored law school photo waiting on her desk, with a note from her students. "Thank you for teaching us that standing up for what's right matters." She smiled, running her fingers over his old law books. Perhaps education truly was the greatest path to justice. And if this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more inspiring tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever stood against someone who abused their authority? And where are you watching from today? Remember, true power comes from knowledge and the courage to stand for what's right.